I will pass it to Michelle whenever you want to start the podcast, and then it's time, baby.
Yeah, okay. Sounds cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Perez. As always, I'm joined by my buddy Jake, my buddy Ruben, and my buddy Eliza. And this is Workinonit. This is a podcast about work, self-employed people, and a lot of jobs that fall in between, as well as a lot of actions that fall in between. Today, I kind of wanted to lighten up and sort of ask a few of you what you've kind of been doing in between working on stuff. Personally, I want to open with not shilling for something, but because we kind of had a slightly spirited discussion of it elsewhere, I've really been enjoying the animated program Invincible. Obviously, people have mixed feelings on it. I enjoy it a lot. I don't feel like that psychotic fandom brain, but because I did group watches of it with friends, and it involved insane amounts of violence that we were all cheering for, like baying animals. It was nice for me. What have y'all been up to?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, to be clear, me and you have been part of those group watches. The Invincible show is fun. I don't have a ton to say about it other than I'm someone who read the comic when it came out and kind of bailed on it about halfway through its run. Didn't really care to finish it. It's superhero Dragon Ball, but the animated version of it is just fun because, as you said, group watching things very fun, and then to see the violence of the book brought to animation is, they spent their budget right. A lot of the show looks cheap, but the violent parts do not look cheap, so that's cool. And yeah, other than that, I'm actually preparing to get back to working. I've been unemployed for a while. I got back into school. I'm going to have to start that hustle pretty soon in the summer. And I've been enjoying very much not having to do a lot until then.
Nice with it.
Yeah, other than making this podcast.
No, I've just been, I just came back from camping this weekend, so a lot of other stuff. I spun up a few of my local friend groups. I'm trying to convert a lot of them to doing poker nights with me, so I'm teaching them different formats of card games. Specifically, we're doing dealer's choice nights, which is where every time you do a game or every time you do a round of games, a dealer switches, give the deck off, and then someone calls a new card game. But I'm trying to spin it into you can bet on any card game and not poker, and literally anything on cards. Someone wants to do bingo. We're trying to work that in. Other than that, I just went camping. That was pretty relaxing. Did some nice food prep and made a stir fry and a wok.
Ooh.
Which is pretty fun. Getting all that stuff to work together.
All right. Pretty nice with it. I've never cooked in a wok. Eliza, how's it been going? How's it hanging?
Same.
Been cooking in woks?
I have one.
Ooh. They're very large.
I mean,
smaller ones too.
They come in all different sizes.
They're relative. It's a relative situation, Michelle. Yeah, I can't just say every wok is large.
Oh man.
Yeah, Michelle, you fucked up.
Cooking in big woks is the best. I used to work a kitchen job where we had wok fires, industrial wok fires installed. It was awesome.
Very nice.
Oh, so good.
All right.
Biggest woks.
On
that
note,
from all walks of life.
Oh fuck. Fuck. No.
All right, folks, that's it. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
It's been a great episode.
Great episode of Working on It. And fantastic. On
that note, we're today joined by a longtime friend of all of ours, an absolutely central figure, I think, in the last 5 years of my life, without a doubt. Wonderful friend, incredibly talented artist. Francine Bridge, you may know her as Witnesstheabsurd. She's a digital artist living in the UK. She's multifaceted, multi-talented, has so many different disciplines she does. And we kind of wanted to ask her, about her career as of late and, talk to her about process and all that good stuff. Welcome, Francine. How's it going?
It's going really well. I feel a little oversold, but other than that, I'm extremely excited to be here, and also very flattered to be described as a longtime friend of everyone here. I've been very very happy to know all of you, to greater or lesser degrees over the last 5 years, certainly. I'm happy to be here. It's interesting. It's been a long time since I was on a podcast. I did periodic guest spots on a podcast that some friends of mine ran called Video Game Hell. But outside of that, I've not really done much in the way of audio stuff. So I don't even run a voice track when I stream work. So this is probably going to be my official voice reveal for a lot of people following me when I link this or whatever.
Another exclusive in the bag for Workinonit podcast.
So many exclusives. So some of the first instances in which I had seen your art were introduced to me by a friend named Rachel. We kind of circulated a lot of the same stuff on Tumblr and knew some of the same people from there. And retroactively, she would show us stuff from the boards we used to go at. Your work was very pencils heavy, not as color rich as you've come to be defined in your sort of later works, and your development as a colorist and a fully rounded, complete artist has just been an amazing progression to watch. But I remember like a lot of the distinct hard lines and very wild sort of grimacing creatures in your work like stood out to me, and stood out to a lot of people. Like recently you kind of broke the 20K mark on Twitter, and you've got a bunch of published works under your sort of repertoire of work. I'm kind of curious. The biggest hallmark of your work seems to be like monsters or atypical form. Like in terms of that, like what's kind of your interest in monsters? If you don't mind my asking.
Why do you like monsters so much, Francine?
Yeah.
What's up with that?
You've asked me a really dangerous question because I have a habit of letting specific topics run away with me and escalate until I've hit on about 15 different like little digressions and so forth. I think I'm going to try and keep this.
It's a good thing you're on a podcast.
Yes.
She took the words out of my mouth. It's a good thing you're on a podcast.
For it.
Let it fly.
And certainly, I like podcasts that have a lot of digressions and run for several hours. So let's see if we can rack up the numbers here. My fascination with monsters goes back a long way. I was the child of diplomats, a pair of diplomats in the employ of the UK government, and as a result, that meant that I moved wherever they moved us, and that most of my earliest memories are actually from New Delhi, from India, which is where we were first. Then we came back to the UK after a short stint in Thailand, which was kind of a transitional period. And then we were back in the UK, and then after that we went to Switzerland, and then we came back to the UK. And I think a lot of my interest in monsters has kind of just developed organically from this bizarre like cauldron of influences that I have received growing up. I've gone to several different very sharply opposed models of education. I started at the international school in Delhi at like a USA style kindergarten, and then sharply veered to the other side when we returned to the UK, and I was put into a boys only private school, which you can imagine was a great way to grow up when you're not quite yet, but will someday be wrestling with conceptions of gender. Uh, Sharply veering again from there to another sort of like much more welcoming and like more laid back, like more sort of human focused international school experience back in Switzerland. And throughout all of this, I was just obsessively consuming anything I could read and get my hands on because I very quickly came to learn that the groups of friends that I was building around myself while I was, I would get one or two incredibly strong friends that I invested a lot of like time and love and so forth into, and then we would move again. So the real constant for me was just consuming everything I could in terms of reading. My parents brought in a tutor for me in India because I don't think they trusted the kindergarten. I don't know why they didn't, but that led to me like learning to read fairly early, and then after that I just consumed literally anything that I could get my hands on. I emptied shelves worth of books that were just total dross. Like I would read anything that came within reach, and it resulted in this melange of media that eventually just it kind of boiled over in me, and the stuff that I found of interest kind of came to the surface, and that was primarily monsters. Of any kind, monsters in myth. I was very invested in mythology. Monsters in scientific fact. I was obsessed with dinosaurs for the longest time because they felt like the closest parallel to like living monsters. Biology also interested me. For the longest time, I was fairly convinced as a kid that I wanted to be a scientist, but I eventually realized that what I really wanted to do was to see a monster in the flesh or to like encounter something that could be described as monstrous. And I pretty quickly realized that that's not the purview of science or scientists. And after a couple of formative exposures to, and this is like a horrible cliche for someone of my age in the illustration industry, formative exposures to some Studio Ghibli work. I saw Spirited Away, a cinema in the UK when it was first on general release, and that had such a profound effect on me. It tilted the entire course of my life, and I began to invest myself into drawing. The work you remember, the pencil work that I did, that was pretty much it for the longest time because pencils were the most readily available object I had, and I was very enamored with displays of technical skill on behalf of a pencil. I liked the idea of deeply, intensely rendered stuff. I was obsessed with Games Workshop imagery. Like Warhammer was a huge influence growing up. It was an obsession for me before I left for Switzerland, and while I was in Switzerland. Warhammer was all-consuming, and there's a lot of very intense black and white rendering in the Warhammer supplemental books from that period. And I found that the best way to imitate that, and it was just pretty much imitation or attempted imitation, was pencils, very heavy pencils, very heavy rendering. I taught myself a lot of tricks to get to acquire like praise and attention from adults primarily. Like I try to be honest with myself about this. As a kid, I was less interested in actually improving myself than I was in getting like in getting attention or like special validation from adults around me. And the number one thing that does that, if you are like a smaller child like invested in art, is to try and render something to an incredible level of detail, or to try and like create something that resembles reality or whatever. I learned a lot of tricks like for doing very smooth pencil gradients or doing like very intricate small drawings that were actually kind of terrible, honestly, but were precisely designed to like get that particular kind of attention that I wanted. And that went on for a long time, and that's kind of where my like weird, gnarly, over-rendered style developed. The point which you mentioned earlier, where I started to try and move from that to where I am now, came right after I finished what would be high school in an American sense, secondary school over here. And I realized like very suddenly that after leaving that and deciding I was going to do a foundation degree for my first sort of year of higher education in art, foundation degree in art, I realized that I either had to throw out everything that I knew prior and relearn and teach myself the actual principles of working as an artist or an illustrator for real, or I was going to have to abandon it. And I threw out all my pencils, and I got a whole bunch of ballpoint pens, and I just spent a whole summer like relearning how to draw. And that was kind of I consider that to be the actual beginning of where I am now. The pencil stuff is certainly still there to some degree, but I see the line that ends in the career that I have now, I think started summer 2013 after I decided that I had to relearn everything. Sorry, I did exactly what I said I was going to. I went off on a huge tangent, and I didn't even really talk that much about why I was invested in monsters, but there you go.
Well, that's why you're here to talk.
There you go.
That's what's up.
Like, can I interject real quick before you move on,
Sure.
Michelle? So would
Totally.
you say that Studio Ghibli in the art circles or art student circles, whichever it is kind of like the Final Fantasy or Nintendo
Ruben.
of art compared to game design?
Ruben.
Final Fantasy and Nintendo are also like huge. The thing is that there's a sort of there's a cluster of influences that are extremely common as the sort of like the primary interaction that you have with a certain kind of media that then inspires you to pursue a career in that media. And in illustration, that's like a very tight knit set of specific directors or studios. And I would say you could probably, it's Nintendo is a huge one. Final Fantasy is also a huge one. And I was exposed to both Nintendo and Final Fantasy, and they had influences as well. But I would say Studio Ghibli is a huge one as for sure. It's Spirited Away especially like has a very profound impact on you if you see it as a child, because it's a film that is designed to like it's designed to appeal to like a child's experience, but also unlike like Disney stuff, which Disney has also a huge influence on a lot of people. But for me as a kid, like Disney was fairly like it was kind of cloying, I guess. Like I enjoyed the films as a kid, and I don't want to imply that I had some sort of higher like understanding where I was like, this is saccharine dross, and as an adult already in mind, if not in body, I understand why this is nothing compared to the works of the great Hayao Miyazaki. I think it was more just that I think it's a love of the grotesque, and Miyazaki like for whatever else is going on with Miyazaki, and he is a complex individual, and certainly not the figure he is painted as. He does have an appreciation, like I do, I think, for something, a kind of beauty or like a kind of beauty or appeal that you can find in the grotesque. One of the last things I did before leaving Dulwich College, which was the aforementioned sort of high school or secondary school, which was probably the lowest point of my entire life, truly miserable. But right before leaving it, there was a period after exams were done, but before the school year ended, where we were invited to write some sort of incredibly self-indulgent pseudo-academic essay on any subject. And I wrote an incredibly lengthy screed that was partly about the Polish artist Zdzisław Beksinski, and mostly about the love that I had for the beauty of the grotesque. Sort of like it's not as though I'm trying to find some sort of like some people describe it as being something along the lines of like a spice or something along those lines, where you like it by contrast, like it elevates like real beauty for you because this thing is so different from it, or it defines it more sharply. But it is quite literally just that I look at things that are typically like described as grotesque or monstrous or whatever, and I find them just genuinely beautiful. And saying that also makes me sound incredibly like self-indulgent and wanky.
No,
and
it
like
doesn't.
It's impossible to talk about these things in terms that can't be interpreted as sort of like self-elevating or self-aggrandizing. Like only I can see the beauty in monsters. I think it's actually a very common trait.
My view from the outside looking in, having known you for so many years, I've probably known you for like 5+ years, I want to say. Like, I think we started our friendship right around a simultaneous sort of within months of one another transition or what have you. But what I picked out, and after the years of getting to know you, but also sort of trying to have a critical eye as well as like an enthusiast and sort of eye, is the experience you've had, all of these things that have informed your art. It not just you go through, you oscillate wildly through highbrow and lowbrow, everything from religious apocryphal as well as very, very campy manga, and the sort of Power Ranger I always fuck up this
Tokusatsu.
word.
Tokusatsu
There you
tokusatsu
go.
is hugely important to me. Yes. I'll let you continue though.
Just fellas in big no, it's the fellas in big suits with eyeballs on them.
Oh yeah.
Like it's your various kaijus, pop culture figures to religious figures to personal takes on depictions of literary characters as well as video game characters, filmic characters. You really run the gamut, and what's sort of interesting is the art that you have consumed that then informs the sensibilities and outcomes in terms of the color swatches you use, the use of shadow and light sources in your work. I'm kind of reminded of those sort of Russian Orthodox paintings of religious figures back in the day, where there would always be this big yellow orb behind the head of said religious figure. Like anyone in the room, and that sort of motif recurs a lot through your art. It's very difficult, sort of vocally trying to get across that idea to a listener. But I think it's sort of important to kind of go through that, because in terms of your output, there's always a sort of sense of the profane, but it's like applied evenly throughout your subjects, which I think is, you've never described yourself as a religious person, and yet the idea of the profane seems to be sort of all across, flatly applied to your work, which I think is quite wonderful. It's been an interesting part of knowing you and knowing all the places you've been and all of those sort of formative bits that kind of go into a composition you make. It's nuts.
I mean, honestly, it's not often that I get like this kind of it's actually been a long time since I talked to someone so directly about my work in this way, or like tried to vocalize some of this stuff. I get questions occasionally via like online services like a Curious Cat or something, where people say, "What are your influences?" or "What do you want to draw?" or something along those lines. And I always find it very difficult to respond, because everything intersects with everything else. I feel like it's impossible to sum up every single facet of why I want to draw monsters or what monsters mean to me. It's really difficult.
well, the first thing, and Eliza said, if you ask people who are your influences, I will quit the podcast.
Oh no,
she said this multiple
I said
times.
if you ask somebody, where do you get your ideas, I will quit the podcast. But it's a very similar line of questioning. And I'm sure Francine is familiar with this. As an artist, you get those fucking questions over and over, and nobody really listens to the response anyway. And
no, it's I think often it's kind of it often comes across for me, especially because I get asked to list who are your inspirations, who are your influences, and so forth. I feel like it's sometimes it comes from a genuine place. A lot of the time it comes from a very pure place of like wanting to ask something, because like often I will appeal to people to be like, hey, ask me questions, I like to talk. I feel like some people like don't necessarily have anything specific they want to ask and want to like field a question, and they're like, this is a question you would ask an artist. And then other people, I think, are looking for a YouTube tab to pop out of the side of my head that says like, to see more like this, click here, and they want me to serve up related videos. Or they want some sort of connection. If there's an artist that they think my work is very similar to, or that has heavy influence showing, and that's an artist that's important to them, they would love to see that is reflected there. And I know I feel the same way when I talk to other artists that I respect or that I'm like invested in. Seeing we have a mutual influence is very validating, and it forms a sense of connection between yourself and that artist, when it can be kind of difficult to feel connected to an individual like that, whose work you have like a distance from, due to the respect that you have for it, or for the way that you encounter it. Like it's an eternal question. I've kind of given up on trying to list favorites or to rank stuff. I think the best thing I can say about I can name a certain few people who are very, very significant influences on me. But I think what I try to do most of all is just to try and let anything potentially influence me. And I'm not the best at this, especially in the last year or so. I very much retreated into comfort zones. But I think the best thing you can do as an artist is to simply intake just about everything from every corner, and whatever interactions happen between 15 different streams is where you're going to find something interesting. You can't draw from one or two sources and expect to output something that doesn't purely reflect those sources, and you can't take in something solely from within your media. Like, I see my field as monster design more than anything. Before illustration, before art, I like to design monsters, and I think that's a very specific, it's a very niche kind of work that's done. And I think a lot of people who I consider to be experts in the field of monster design would not think of themselves that way or have codified it like that. But it's sort of an intersection of the way one might design a character, like a human character, the way one might design clothing, fashion design, the way one might design architecture. Like it's an intersection of so many different disciplines, and you have to draw from every single one of those. I want to look at fashion. I want to look at buildings. I want to listen to completely unrelated media. I want to watch crime dramas, and I want to watch documentaries, and I want to read non-fiction books about specific kinds of Norwegian leather or something on those lines, and you have no idea where anything is going to come from. And even as I'm saying this, it feels like a kind of facile or easy thing to say about, like, you should just keep your influences as wide as possible. But it's very true to how I've tried to work anyway. And that's. But if we want to talk about specific influences, I can also do that. I really do have I have like a little short list of artists who have been very important to me personally. If we wanted to talk about that, but I'll go with wherever people want to.
By all means. Yeah, pop off. Like.
Okay.
Well, hold on. Let's try to go like direction wise in terms of like where's a good place for you to start? Like what's a stronger one? For example, like film, like does that hit you harder than like a print artist, or say like a traditional painter?
Film is a difficult one because the thing is that most of the films that I value like most profoundly to myself are very specifically their animation, and then the things that I value within those are specific visuals. A discussion that I've had with people before when I've talked about stuff like this is I really loathe it when people describe something as having primarily style over substance, because I think that style is in and of itself an element of substance. It's a portion of it. You may dislike that, and you may be completely correct in disliking a work that places, a visual motif or some sort of like visual flair or whatever above, say, like character development or like coherent narrative arc or anything along those lines. But I think that it's very diminishing of the work that that artists do, artists among other people, many other people involved in the production of something as complex as a film, especially an animated one. It's very diminishing to say that the implication with style over substance is often that style is lesser, that it has like a sort of transparent or like foam-like quality to it, that it dissipates, whereas substance is hard, substance is real. You need to build a house out of substance, not style. I think style is, like I said, in and of itself a kind of substance. It may not be the right kind of substance for something, but it requires just as much effort, just as many hours, just as much time, and it is the accumulated fruit of everything that has gone into a person to produce that. So as much as I'd like to say that there are specific films that I like for the sake of them being films, it's more often in almost everything, whether it's a book or an opera or anything, the thing I take away from it will be some specific kind of style, some moment, some visual that captured me. And then that often elaborates onwards. Although I am a sucker for high melodrama, I love very broad gauche, like grand guignol, like narrative notes and stuff like that. I love that. I love big spectacular tragedies, but I, yeah, no, here I go again. Film. I would say that I don't think there's any specific medium that hits me more or less than any other. I can only name examples that stand out at me. I would say a comic, or a comic or an art book, something that is visual first and is already directly like an image, such as I might like draw myself, something that I can empathize with directly with regards to the creation of, or the execution of, like that. That's something that stands out to me. So that has a better chance of impacting me, but maybe slightly. But I like I said, I try to draw it from all sides, and I can't say there's any one medium that immediately says to me like, oh yeah, no, if it's a film, I'm going to get on board with it. I can't be certain.
But Francine, you also mentioned you had a list of artists that you do consider primaries. We don't have to go too deep, but if you wanted to just like name names for the sake of establishing that style,
Get that
or
clout.
for the sake of kind of just giving the listeners a reference, feel free
There-
to just list them off.
Okay, I mean, a couple that have been very important to me in the last few years, specifically as I've been trying to decide what direction to steer my work in, and that's been a crossroads that stands between like, do I invest more in line work like I used to, or do I like go wholly into painting, and how does that change the way that I do rough sketches, and how does that change the way that I output to clients, and how does that, etc. I've been using a couple of artists as sort of milestones or like landmarks by which to orient myself in that sense, because they produce work that I would be proud to produce myself, like unutterably proud. So I've been trying to steer myself using them as influences, and some of those artists would be almost all of them are actually Japanese. I've realized Yasushi Nirasawa from the tokusatsu scene. Tamotsu Shinohara, also a tokusatsu legend. Takayuki Takeya, also additionally works within tokusatsu spaces, but is primarily a sculptor. Keita Amemiya, who worked with all of them. In fact, I've kind of become invested in the work of this sort of circle of individuals from Japan who came to like prominence in the late 80s, early 90s through to the 2000s, who all either grew out of or were involved with the garage kit scene, the sort of like semi-underground sculpture hobbyist enthusiast scene in Japan, where they were producing unlicensed Kamen Rider kits and so forth, that were these wildly elaborate and usually fairly grotesque reimaginings of existing properties. And I love to reinterpret stuff. I love to take simple designs and render lots of ridiculous, gnarly detail into them, and try and elaborate little like rough, ambiguous details into something much more complex. And it often diminishes the design, I think, in an objective sense, to do that kind of thing, because designs that are simple and communicate themselves strongly are very that's an objective strength. But it's something that I find personally engaging. But outside of them, I think one artist that I particularly want to talk about is Wayne Barlow, who is Wayne Barlow started his career as a paperback and sort of science fiction, fantasy cover illustrator for magazines, for like I said, for paperback novels back in the 70s, I think, when he
Sure.
was very young. And Wayne is interesting to me because, first of all, he's one of my longest influences. I remember discovering his work back at Dulwich College, and obsessively browsing his website, obsessively browsing the books that I could find of his, which are very thin on the ground, by the way. I treasure the copies that I have now, because the art books he has produced have gone out of print fairly quickly and barely ever come back into it. Wayne is again, it feels very self-aggrandizing to compare myself to an individual like Wayne, because he has had a career that's spanned a much greater span of time than my own, and I think that what he's accomplished is on a greater scale. But I have seen a lot of myself in Wayne, and in the arc of his career, I think a lot about what my career would have been like if I had existed in an earlier time frame, because entry into the illustration industry, entry into especially the fantasy and science fiction illustration industry, which now has a huge, almost 100% overlap with production for games, films, so forth, because our culture, the massive like blockbuster engine of culture, is obsessed with science fiction and fantasy right now in a way it hasn't been since the heyday. So there's this near one-to-one overlap. I've thought a lot about what it would be like to have entered it at a different time and place, when I was prior to the existence of something like the internet, prior to the existence of something like the existing sort of library of genres and subdivision of genres, where there was this sort of very strange, like sprawling set of artists like I'm sorry if I get some of these names wrong. Roger Dean, Bruce Pennington.
I was going to ask about Bruce Pennington. Actually,
Bruce Pennington, yes.
He had some art license for a metal band that I quite like.
Yes.
For an album release, like that was how I discovered him as an artist.
They all entered into an industry where like I solicit all of my clients myself. I am my own agent. I put myself out there and I say I am doing X number of commissions, and people come to me and I select the work that I feel like I can do my best at or that I have space for. And that is the norm for huge numbers of freelancers right now. For the vast majority of freelance illustrators I know personally, that is the norm. You put yourself out there. You say you have commission slots. You might have more sort of high-end professional work that you do via contracting, which is solicited by someone more formal. But for most of us, we do it ourselves because the systems that used to exist to facilitate like illustrators meeting clients and so forth, something like a publishing house or an illustration house where you would get an agent and you may be one of 6 or 7 illustrators who belong to this agent who they are like soliciting work for. That doesn't exist anymore, or if it does, it exists in a way that's incredibly diminished because the vast majority of those sort of stables are like sewn up. You can't get into them, and you certainly can't get into them as an untested 20-something who just likes to paint fan art of Evangelion or whatever. That just doesn't exist anymore. But Wayne Barlow went through that. He was incredibly young, younger than I was when he got his first professional work. He started working at something like 2021, I think, 19 maybe. And he was immediately doing covers for books and covers for magazines and so forth. And that because someone saw him and decided this kid can make me a buck,
right.
And started they said, I'll be your agent. I'll start soliciting this stuff. And in the years since then, he has grown and he has had the unique special arc that many illustrators from that era have had, which they may have coveted or may have fallen into by accident or by their own design, which is to outgrow being merely someone who facilitates someone else's work, and to be respected and desired for the sake of your own work. To go from being a warm body who will paint you a dragon to being someone that someone else seeks out specifically because the way you paint dragons is compelling, or because there exists a fan base for your own work. There's a following for you, not for the works. There may be followings for works you have contributed to, but people go to Wayne Barlow because they want Wayne Barlow's art, and that's something that I think is it's always been very important to me to I want someday to be desired, to have clients come to me because they want something specific from my work, not because they need someone who knows how to paint. And it's incredibly it's vain to think that you can be desired like that. But it's
I was about to say a lot of very successful stuff that I've seen you get some play on various social media for is some of your fan works as well as tributes to X amount of things. And I mean, do you kind of wonder sometimes do you have to tick the certain boxes to be commercially viable while still retaining your own identity as an artist?
I think that what's viable in the commercial space is hugely different depending on which part of the commercial space you want to enter into. And I think that I have never felt myself. I have been very fortunate in that regard. I have never been in a situation where I have been forced to make myself commercially appealing. I've been in situations where I had been hired because someone did not know who I was and just decided that they needed an artist. Notably, fairly recently, I was in an in-studio job just before studios ceased being a thing, where I was doing design work for theme parks, and that was very disorienting because they had no idea who I was and they did not give a shit, which is I'd reached the point where like most of my online clients came to me because they liked the way I draw monsters and those lines. And then I had this very abrupt awakening where I was like, that exists only in like a specific sphere that you have surrounded yourself with. Outside of that, like most of these people who are going to pay you for contracted work, they do not know who you are. They are not interested in you. They only want you there because you know how to use Photoshop or Illustrator or so forth. And they need someone to paint a waiting room area for a theme park ride like yesterday. They need that as quickly as you can possibly get it for them. But getting there didn't require me to very specifically tailor myself to that. It just happened because my work like made it self-evident that I knew how to at least use Photoshop. That was about the extent of it. I think these days there's a very sharp division there. I think you're either sought out because you have the skills, you simply have like art skills and you are capable of doing something like that, or they have no interest whatsoever, or they go all the way over to the other end and they want you because you can do a very precise thing, because you have a niche skill, or you have a niche like following, or you have like something that is valuable or unique about your own work in their eyes. I don't think there's like I've at least in the freelance illustration space like that I work in, which is primarily for like small games, small art book releases, private clients, and so forth. I've never felt in that space the need to like tailor myself and say I need X amount of these in my portfolio to get attention. I've certainly felt the need to go, I need to have more human faces in my portfolio so people know I know how to paint a human face and not just one that's erupting into a whole bunch of teeth and mandibles. But I've been lucky in that I've been able to like to mostly work like on my own merit. I'm fairly certain that's actually kind of just incredible luck on my behalf and no small amount of privilege. Like I've been very fortunate in that I have very rarely or never had to deal with some things like housing security or job security. I have often been supported both by my parents and by friends and so forth that has allowed me to dedicate myself to pursuing what I find interesting in my work and to build a career based off of that. I'm never going to pretend that I have some sort of unique skill that has allowed me to avoid having to tailor myself in that way. It comes very specifically from a bedrock of like economic and like familial support that's allowed me to grow that way. Like that's just the reality of it. And if I deny that, then I'm a huge piece of shit. So that's worth considering.
Be a little charitable yourself. It's cool. You've been an excellent friend to me and many others. So I know there's always that sort of need to be humble, and it's from a great human place. But yeah,
I'm just picturing a lot of people.
I think self-awareness is fine.
I'm picturing a lot of people who have only ever known me because they follow my Twitter, seeing the post, the link to this podcast and being like, wow, I can't wait to hear what she sounds like. And then coming in here and listening to about 10 seconds of me and then just grimly tabbing back and unfollowing me. That's the phantom image that's like haunting me right now. But I'm gonna let go of that.
Yeah.
That's neuroses. It's not reality.
Yep, that's exactly what Eliza said.
I am nothing if not neurotic.
That is all I was going to say.
I am riddled with neuroses.
Francine, this is the first time I'm hearing your voice, and honestly, you sound like someone that would spit in someone's mouth for giving you shrimp.
Here's my snappy response. I'm never going to turn down more shrimp. So you can be sure that if I spit on someone, it's not because they gave me shrimp. In fact, I'm old. If anyone's got some shrimp to hand, I love a good shrimp tempura, shrimp paste, whatever you got. I love shrimp.
I'm always saying this.
This is so tangential.
Shrimp is good.
This is so tangential because it's just literally a connection in my head between shrimp and another kind of crustacean. But if we're talking about my journey as an artist, I was just reminded very vividly now that there is a small framed picture at my mother's house in London of a red crab drawn in felt tip marker, which is the earliest surviving drawing that I ever made as a kid, which was made of a crab. Or my recollection of a crab, because we did not have it to hand after my mother took my brother and me out as very, very small children to go crab fishing, which is one of the few things you can do for entertainment in Dorset, in coastal Dorset, which is where she grew up, one of the places she grew up. And crab fishing involves, it doesn't actually involve fishing for crab to actually eat and keep. It's literally just a form of self-entertainment where you go out to a small wooden pier or the edge of the water, and you get a bucket and you lower the bucket into the water, and you put several small pieces of bacon in the bucket, and inevitably crabs will crawl into the bucket because they love bacon, and they have also, I think, grown very
Natural
accustomed to
diet
the
of a
crab fishing
crab.
practice. They know
Yeah.
what's happening. They know what's going to happen is that they're going to get in the bucket, they're going to eat some bacon, they're going to be pulled back up to the surface, and then they're going to be taken out of the bucket, and they're going to be showed to probably a child, or like just held for a bit and examined, like, wow, what a crab. And then they're going to be put back in the bucket and lowered back into the water. They're not even harmed. They're not
I'm
even,
just
there's no hooks or
imagining-
anything.
I'm just imagining like one crab telling another crab, like, dude, have you tried the weird pork? Have you tried the bacon stuff? I don't even know what it's called.
Dude, this is
you
the
gotta
place we
you
go
gotta
to
try
die.
it. You gotta
Let's go
try this.
die.
It's like the crab equivalent of doing an acid trip with your friends.
Yep. Oh man, it's so great. You
You get
eat
to
the
see
bacon, and then
God.
you're floating upwards. A huge hairless ape is like manhandling you. You can hear distant like voices. It's fucking great. Then you're back in the water. You've got a belly full of bacon. You're good. You don't eat the crab because you're catching. That's the thing. Crab fishing in this context, if you're seriously fishing for crab in coastal Dorset, then you're going out on a boat and you're throwing a net overboard, or crab pots or something, and you're bringing in several hundred crab, and then you're selling them, because most of like coastal rural England has kind of lost its ability to fish for like on an individual level. All of that is gone, and so I mean, I imagine there are probably large numbers of people who still do that, but it's not significant enough like that. It's, you can expect a person who catches something in England to fish and eat it. Fishing in England on a personal one-to-one level has become the preserve of those who wish to entertain themselves. In this particular case, crab fishing is probably one of the more benign ones because it doesn't injure the crabs. The crabs are fed and returned hale and hearty, aside from like being overturned by a small child in their hands for a bit. It's mostly just something you do to there were about 4 or 5 other people every time we went crab fishing when my mother would take us to Dorset, and they were just sitting there at the end of the pier, and they would just pick the crabs up and look at them. They appreciated the crab. They put it back in the water. This is probably not something that even happens anymore, to be clear. I have no idea. I just remember this happening multiple times when I was a child. My mother said that she used to do it when she was a child. I think when she was a child, there was still the chance that you might say, I'm going to bring this crab home. But to be clear, you are not catching giant crabs with this technique. You're catching small crabs. You're catching the kind of crabs that scuttle across the beach, and you point at them and go, "Wow, a crab!" If you brought in a super king size crab, you might consider keeping it. But certainly, I don't think any of the crabs that we got would provide more than about 10 seconds of nourishment at that.
Well, would you get more? Would you get more crab than you had bacon? Like how many batons of bacon?
You'd be surprised how many crabs will show up for one very small cube of bacon. We're talking like a single lardon, you get like 4 or 5 crabs. I guess actually, now I think about it, you could probably take all the crabs at once and make a decent amount of crab from that.
Like a crab pot. You get a good stock going.
See, I like soft shell crab. I like deep fried soft shell crab, which is something that I discovered I could order when I was living in St Albans, which is just outside of London. There was a restaurant that you could order soft shell crab from. And I had never really gotten that much into crab. I like lobster rolls and so forth. I had no objection to crab, but I didn't eat much of it. And on a complete whim, I was like, the picture of this looks like they deep fried the entire crab, just legs and claws and all. That's amazing to me. I have to try that. And that is indeed what soft shell crab is. It's a relatively small, hand-sized crab. Because it is soft-shelled, i.e., it is just malted, they kill it and eat it at a very specific time for this effect. It doesn't have any real crunch to the shell. It is soft all the way through. So you literally just dip it in tempura batter and fry it, and it's just a whole crab. And something, again, getting back to my love of the grotesque, there was something about the image of just having an entire crab and just popping it into my mouth like that and being able to eat the whole thing, claws and all, that was very appealing to me and very distressing to my roommate. And as a result, I would refrain from ordering too many soft shell crabs. It's been a while since I had one, but I would really like one. They go really well with like a ginger sauce or something.
Did you ever ask your roommate if you do like a horrifying face as you enjoy consuming a being whole, and that's why they don't enjoy?
She insisted that I did make a horrifying face whenever I consumed the crabs. So
okay, they made their own bed and then they slept in it.
Yeah, I agree. Any grotesque type food like that, I will absolutely order and try at least once. And seafood's great for that because there's so many seafoods that you can eat the whole thing, and or the animal in question looks like it's from hell.
When you get calamari as a kid, that's always like a fun. Like I remember when I was a kid and I graduated from, we'd get fried calamari at an Italian place for like an appetizer, and I graduated from eating just the rings of stuff to the legs, the actual legs. And I felt much more like a grown up as a kid. I was like, oh yeah, this is what grown ups do. They eat the
It's a
legs.
sign of maturity. I've been trying to eat a little bit more vegan in the last few years because I think that that's an adjustment we're probably all going to have to make.
No, sure.
But it's not. I would be very interested in trying to I don't know, raise my own livestock, I guess, or something on those lines on a small scale. I feel like I'm very disconnected as a person from the reality of the meat that I consume, and I don't want to be that way. I would like to at least try like getting closer to the process of actually butchering and consuming meat that you have raised, like to understand it more. Like I feel like that's the only way I'm going to be able to. I'm growing gradually less comfortable with eating meat, and I feel like if I don't like put myself through that at least once, I'm probably going to reach a point where I will desist altogether. But certainly,
Yeah.
I would like to go fish. I'd maybe just fish some crabs up. Maybe go back crab fish, and this time I keep the crab and I eat it.
Yeah, you have to learn to monster hunt in real life.
Yeah, certainly. I think I'm done with red meat. Mostly just eat these particular plant burgers. But that's also just because it's been a long time since I had like a beef product that wasn't slow cook beef that I found appealing. I've yet to I had a lot of steak growing up because we were jetting all over the continent, all over Europe, and Steak Fleet is a very reliable meal you can get for fussy kids at a bistro or whatever while you're road tripping.
Good old
I can't say that I
cut.
ever looked forward to the steak. I imagine you can cook a really fantastic steak, but I've personally, it's just a little bit. It's never really fully appealed, and after a while, the same was true of beef burgers. But I still like the construct of a burger. So putting something else in that patty has been fantastic for us. I really enjoy these plant burgers, and it made me realize that for me, the burger is way more about the bun, the sauce, and the assorted trappings than it is the patty itself, which is kind of secondary in a lot of ways.
Man, I completely disagree.
Yeah, I do enjoy burgers. Like I eat plant burgers, but I don't think there's any disputing that a regular burger will taste better to me.
I think the thing is where they're on the right track is where they try to replicate that weird hormonal response to like the taste of blood and that weird coppery sort of back note of it, and kind of have that in the when they get the taste of blood like fully down, we're gonna go ham on these fake ass burgers.
I mean, I don't know about lab grown meat, but you're more likely to get it from that than from a plant thing.
For me, with meat substitutes, I don't like meat substitutes. That's it. I would much rather that I know that there's this is never going to happen because there's a very specific kind of marketing that has to be done around this kind of thing, and the forces that dictate the almighty power of marketing will always drive things in a certain direction. But I infinitely prefer vegan alternatives to meat that market themselves as themselves rather than as this is just like meat. This is just like I would rather it just be a different thing that just doesn't have meat in it. That's why I like seitan, for instance. It's not. I think it's very. I'm not interested in something that replicates meat. I'm interested in something that can be used instead of meat because it has some of the same properties and interacts similarly with cooking methods or sauces or whatever. But I'm not interested, and I'm also not interested ultimately in eliminating meat completely from my diet. I just want to reach a point where the meat that I consume is specifically chosen, is more is more worthwhile, and is more and where I am more aware of the process that's involved in getting it. I think being conscious of that is important. But I think seitan is great. There is a place here in London, in Camden, which I dearly miss, that I'm going to go back to as soon as I guess as soon as I can get there, because I'm starting to go back out into London very carefully, double masked and with extreme caution. But there's a place called the Temple of Seitan, which I love the name. It's a little cringy, but I'm very delighted by their whole theming.
Oh,
And
yeah.
they just do what I was craving for from vegan food or from vegetarian stuff in general for a long time, which is just really junky stuff. They do really fantastic, like piled high fried chicken burgers and sort of super greasy fries and all that stuff. And they do amazing things with seitan, as their name would suggest. And I think that's for me where it goes. I want vegan alternatives that are not pretending to be meat, but are saying not only is this not meat, like this is something alternative that might even be better, or like has its own unique qualities that make it appealing. It's not calling itself like plant bacon. It's just called something completely new. Like, instead of obviously there's plenty of things that already exist like that, like tempeh, tofu, like seitan. They do not define themselves as like meat substitute. But I think we should go even further. We need even more different kinds of things. Instead of, if someone wants to invent a new kind of bacon alternative, they can just call it, like, I don't know, Selznats or something. Like, just come up with a completely new name. It's a new thing. It's kind of like bacon. You can use it like bacon in the same way,
sure.
but it's not pretending to be bacon.
Yeah. All naming of these types of products is ultimately going to end up as a type of marketing, right?
It changes your perception of the way that you of the product, because the moment it describes itself as imitation bacon, you're comparing it to actual bacon, and that's a
Right.
comparison that it's just never going to be able to to clear, even regardless of how you feel about the quality of bacon. And God knows bacon, the quality thereof has become insufferable to discuss in most online spaces, thanks to one particular marketing effort. But it's just I don't like to make a direct comparison like that. I would rather it like market itself on what it has to offer in and of itself as a Rendell strip or a Billsmanskin or whatever. I don't know.
I'm
Whatever
writing
name
these
they've
names
decided
down.
to-
I'm writing all of these names down into a
Lashings
notebook.
of Rendell strips piled high on the table.
So that's how you fish for crab.
Well, that's crab fishing, I guess.
I mean, I would kind of like to still stay within this idea here. Like, should we get like immediately into like geometric shapes of vegetable
No.
units?
No, fuck you. No.
No.
I mean, here's the problem. The more you process something, the more carcinogenic it becomes. And that's like one of the big reasons. A lot of times people will convert to veganism, and then like 2 years later they get like really serious metabolic disorders, and they're like, why am I diabetic? I'm vegan, I eat healthy. And they're not eating healthy. They're eating Oreos and corn nuggets, and that shit is delicious. It's so good, but it's like every time a piece of food touches another piece of processing equipment, it picks up basically contamination. And I mean, this is they're finding that this contamination from processing equipment is worse for you than pretty much anything else. So Francine's right. We need like plant-based foods that are not processed to the point where they're trying to be something else. They just should be standing on their own merits, and they have a lot of fucking merits.
For sure.
I mean, I think the way subsidies works in the States, at least as far as I go, is that it errs more towards the side of processing or whatever, because that the way the subsidies.
You can put more corn into it that way.
Yeah, you could basically
absolutely.
put more corn into it, and then
the more corn you could make something, the cheaper it is to make.
And then you just end up with food deserts everywhere, and there are just all of these base components united by fucking corn. I hate kernel corn by itself, but that's a whole different episode, folks.
Oh man, frozen corn is such a nice snack.
On the cob, or you just mean like only separate kernels?
Like out of the
those
freezer
fucking
bag.
separate kernels, the freezer bag or the canned.
Yo, I used to get roasted.
Absolutely. Yes.
Thank you. Eliza, you just single-handedly validated my childhood. Yes.
Yes.
We are in the same boat. I was just going to say this. Frozen peas,
Corn?
frozen corn.
Frozen corn and peas. Mm-hmm.
Corn by itself.
As a child, I would reach into the freezer and just grab like a few out of the bag, like a handful out of the bag.
You just eat it cold?
Yeah, it's totally legit.
It's a good snack. It's nice.
Okay, hold on. Let me go do that. This sounds like bullshit to me.
Yeah, give it a shot.
All right.
Hold on. Yeah.
live.
Folks, it's
Live
happening.
report of Ruben trying some corn out of his freezer.
Fucking sickening.
Corn by itself is one of the last foods that are left in what used to be a much longer list of incredibly.
Oh my god!
I used to be
this
incredibly
is audio
fussy
material.
about stuff, honestly.
All right, we have Kirkland Signature Organic White Sweet Corn, frozen.
Okay.
5-pound bag.
Yeah, just eat like 2 or 3 kernels. Pop them in.
I'll do 3.
He's just gonna get a big fucking icy clump.
I hope he likes it.
I'll do 5 individual kernels.
Oh, it's ASMR time, baby.
Sharpen a knife while you do this.
I was stropping, I told you. Ew, that's pretty good.
All right, yeah.
Yeah!
Right.
Let's fucking go! Welcome to the club, baby.
What's up?
So to the viewers at home, to get more context than just it's pretty good. If you don't have corn to eat right now, it's like a sherbet texture. It's corn ice cream, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah.
The little corn like frozen delight.
It's like a zero effort little snack. It's good for summertime, because it's cold.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like a nice popsicle. You just take a pocketful to go.
Yeah. But it's a vegetable. I mean, it's a starchy vegetable, but it's a vegetable. It's a whole vegetable. You got some fiber in there. That's good for you.
Yo, I totally used to get shit for eating corn out of the freezer. It is so good.
Yeah. Extra water. It's hydrating. The potassium is off these charts.
Nice. I'm glad you like it, man.
I
Yeah,
can't
no,
relate because I was a horribly
that's-
fussy eater as a child, like catastrophically so. There are entire, not even like groups of food, entire like kingdoms of food that I would not touch
I grew up
because I had
kinda that way.
profound like sensory issues with the idea of not in a real sense. I'm not trying to like pathologize this or elevate it to the condition of something. I was just a very fussy kid. I didn't like what I described as wet food, which is to say anything that could not be pinned down with a fork, cut in half with a knife, and eaten just like as pieces, basically. So spaghetti, noodles, pasta of all kinds, soups, anything like too sort of sloppy in construction or like like a lasagna or anything that like falls apart. Like
what about
I just,
melted cheese or something like that?
Melted cheese on something I did it. I got around to quicker than other things, but cheese in general, I still won't eat like what I have taken to describing as raw cheese, which is to say unmelted cheese.
Raw cheese,
baby. But over the last 4 years specifically, my partner, my fiance, Lauren, has, through great personal effort, managed to expand my diet so much that I am now eating almost everything, and I will try almost everything. And I feel like I feel like I've come out of a long period of self-enforced like torture, basically, because I deprived myself of things like broth in ramen and ramen itself and like a million different kinds of vegetable and salad and so forth. I'm not really sure what happened there. My mother said that I ate everything up to a certain point, and then when I was about 4 or 5, I just very aggressively refused to eat anything except certain types of food, and we never found out what happened.
I kind of went through that when I was a kid too. Like I remember, we went to a Mexican restaurant and they brought me like a PB&J. Like my parents packed one for me. Like that, it was that level.
No. I used to do exactly that kind of thing.
Yeah,
it's pretty common. That's yeah.
Totally.
It's a child psychology thing. It usually occurs because the kid needs to exert control over something, and if you just, it's just something. It's like kind of like a groove you can get into when you're a kid, and if you don't snap out of it on your own, it can kind of persist into adulthood. Because if it happens when you're 4, I mean, that's the time when you're learning all those tastes and textures and stuff. And if you hit 20 and you're still not used to eating that way, then it's hard to get started. So it's really impressive that you managed to expand your palate now as an adult. A lot of people aren't able to do that.
the thing I was most impressed by was my newfound ability to enjoy soup, because the idea of like a hot savory liquid was like the worst of it was like the true sort of like ultimate taboo that I had to break. And now like I cannot get by without like regular like really good like ramen broth or like a French onion soup. Like something like that has now become a regular like staple for me, and something that I will make for myself at the drop of a hat. And I love that. I'm so happy that has changed.
I'm envisioning you staring down like a comically large Dark Souls evil looking pot of soup.
Yes, I started eating noodles, and yet even back when I started eating noodles and started having like something like ramen noodles or whatever, or spaghetti and so forth, I would specifically need it to be like drained of the broth and fried or something on those lines in order to get through it. And I don't need that anymore. Like I'm now an adult, and I eat all of the thing. But it was amazing how long that particular issue persisted. There are two major roadblocks for me that still remain. But at this point, I'm kind of reaching the point where I'm starting to realize like there may be some things that I truly actually do not like, and I'm not going to necessarily force myself to come to like it, because you can have preferences. But I do wish, I think it's the key thing is that there are some things I wish I could find myself eating and enjoying, and I think those are the things I will press for. One of those is eggs. I at the no end of like egg component items I enjoy, like anything that has eggs in it, stuff that has had eggs incorporated into it. That stuff I'll eat just fine. But eggs by themselves, fried eggs, scrambled eggs, like eggs in the breakfast sense, like I just can't. It's truly which is incredibly frustrating, because I look at a fried egg, like a really nice fried egg where it's gotten a little crispy at the edges and so forth, and it's delightful to me. Like visually speaking, it looks delicious, but I just can't bring myself to eat it. That is one thing I need to get over. That and raw cheese. So I'm gonna try my best at some point to eat a sandwich that has a fried egg in it and like just a slice of cheese directly off of the cheese itself, with no additional melting or editing applied.
I'm not sure if those two will go together necessarily well.
It's got to be done. It's the only way.
But if that's the way you can overcome your barriers, I'm not here to stop you.
Hold on.
Egg and cheese?
Well, egg and specifically not melted cheese.
Oh.
As I've been saying this, and I'm sorry to get back on the mic again, I've been passed, much like Ruben, I'm about to undergo a challenge myself, because I've just been passed a sandwich with raw cheese and salami in it.
Oh, snap.
So if you give me a moment, I'll mute myself.
Hold on. What the hell is raw cheese?
Oh, did you miss this? Michelle, did you miss this?
What's raw cheese? They haven't processed it? Illegal raw cheese?
Michelle,
Francine has established if cheese is not melted, it is raw.
That is okay. To be clear, I know how ridiculous that sounds. I use the term because it's easier than saying unmelted cheese, and also crucially because it's funnier.
It's very funny. Yeah. To be clear.
Here I go.
Let's go, folks. We're wide.
I forgot to ask what kind, but we'll find out.
The anticipation's killing.
It's an extra mature cheddar slice from Sainsbury's.
Oh, that's my jam. That's my jam. Yeah.
That was very good. That was fantastic, actually. There's some yellow mustard in there as well, and it's a calabrese salami, which I get from an Italian deli in the neighborhood I like to take long walks to, and that's. I mean, the assistance of the other elements is definitely helping. I'm still not sure if I can surmount the challenge of eating like just a slice of raw cheese by itself, but there we go. We conquered another mountain. So now all that remains is eggs.
God,
we're breaking barriers on this episode.
I am amazed. I'm so glad I was like fucking on the call to hear that. That's so great to be able to witness a moment like that for someone. Thank you for sharing that with us.
That does own. Yeah, shout out to Lauren for for having a sandwich on hand too.
Yeah, shout out Lauren, friend of the show.
Absolutely.
She incidentally just made one for herself, I think, and overheard part of the conversation. Yeah, she's nodding to confirm that.
I'm still grappling with raw cheese.
I want to get away from raw cheese.
Where were you? Because Francine said raw cheese like 20 minutes ago.
I missed the first raw cheese. Like I may have made a sucking noise, and like my internal
Michelle
ear
looking around as everyone else acknowledges what raw cheese is and looking down at her notes.
Yeah, you never heard of raw cheese before?
Like raw
Michelle?
cheese? Question mark? I've never heard it once. I'm fucking beside myself.
Oh, it's
that
great.
said,
Yeah, I was here for that. I don't know how temporal differences. Real quick, Francine, you've heard of raw cheese. What about, have you had refried beans? I assume it has been prepared for you.
Okay, it's part of that got garbled, but I think you said was beans, refried beans.
Cheese on refried
happily.
beans? Yeah.
I was introduced to them in the medium of several soups that were prepared the last time I was in Oklahoma with Lauren's family. We had a tortilla soup that had a lot of good beans and stuff in it. I'm totally fine with those. Yeah.
Would you agree that the method of which that they are prepared would also, they could be, probably should be renamed reduced beans?
I don't know enough about the beans to make a decision either way. I'll defer to your bean knowledge and say I fully endorse that position.
all right. Actually, no. I was gonna again kick the ball to one of my lovely co-hosts.
Oh yeah. Well, one thing Francine mentioned, just to put I'm going to close the food talk because it's been good, but we've got time to get to talking to other things.
Yeah.
Do we?
You mentioned a lot of your influences being tokusatsu artists or tokusatsu adjacent artists. I've always been interested in your level of fandom for tokusatsu stuff, which, to be clear to listeners, is like it's Japanese action entertainment in the vein of Kamen Rider, and it's something somewhat distinct from stuff like Power Rangers, which is Sentai. Am I correct in that?
Okay, so the term tokusatsu, and to be clear, first of all, I don't claim to be an expert on any of these things. And if I am, if someone sends in a correction, they may very well be correct. So I'm not going to. I'm also not one of the individuals who have like the encyclopedic knowledge of it, understanding of tokusatsu that I think something like tokusatsu deserves, honestly, to be fully understood. But my understanding as it stands is this: tokusatsu is a word that specifically encompasses a certain kind of live suit practical effects, like I guess filmmaking initially that came out of Japan, starting primarily in the Showa era. Where special effects were easiest to accomplish using like stuff that echoed like a B movie or something like rubber suits, miniature buildings. It means anything that's produced in that style. Over time, the term has had to expand to encompass lots of things, and certainly, like there are now tokusatsu shows, like for instance Garo, which have huge amounts of CG effects in them, or the most recent season of Kamen Rider Saber, was obligated by pandemic conditions to film large portions of what is normally a very practical effects heavy show in Unreal Engine. Which is very disorienting because they swap very hard to it. Kamen Rider has infamously had terrible CG because they produce week to week, and they've never really invested much in CG. So very often they'll have these astonishingly crafted suits, and then they'll swing their swords to summon an array of hovering CG objects to fly at someone, and those will look very crude, but that's also part of the charm. Tokusatsu basically just means anything that is produced within that. So Sentai is a kind of tokusatsu. Sentai means stuff that derives from one of the first like canonical sort of Sentai things was Himitsu Sentai Gorenger, which was produced by I think Shotaro Ishinomori, who basically created almost every he created the manga that was adapted into almost every like core original like tokusatsu show, except maybe for Ultraman, which came out of a Twilight Zone style thing called Ultra Q. So yeah, tokusatsu. Within tokusatsu, you have henshin stuff, which is transforming hero, and that's Kamen Rider. That's people who single characters who may have other single heroes who help them, but not team elements, who transform to fight evil. You have Sentai stuff, which is a team. Sentai stuff has mostly only survived in the form of the very specific, what is known as like the Sentai series that Power Rangers, or the thing that was adapted to Power Rangers, a lineage of. There are not many like variant stuff outside of that these days. There are still a few more henshin series than just Kamen Rider, but Kamen Rider is kind of the primary henshin series. Sentai stuff in the vein of Zioranger, Kakuranger, all of those shows are the Sentai shows. And then the third thing, which there is still a little bit more space in, is kaiju, and that is the classic like giant monsters. And then you also have Ultraman, who is technically a henshin hero, but kind of overlaps with kaiju stuff because traditionally Ultraman grows to a giant size at the end of every episode or during an episode to do combat with a kaiju size opponent, who may be that size normally or may themselves transform to become that size. But you could be pretty sure that'll happen at some point. That also often happens in Sentai. It was a very popular mechanic at one point, and when Tsuburai's Ultraman became hugely popular, suddenly everyone else had to try and have either their own hero or they had to make everyone grow to a massive size. Godzilla, infamously, because kaiju stuff, pure kaiju stuff, was kind of failing versus transforming giant hero stuff like Ultraman, they introduced Jet Jaguar, a hapless robot character fashioned after a mangled version of a kid. A kid sent in a drawing that was part of a design a character contest. They took the barest elements of his design for a monster, turned them into a robot, Jet Jaguar, and then they did Godzilla versus Megalon, I think is the name of the film, which it was basically designed to be sort of like, we know Godzilla is our main property. We know that henshin stuff like transforming hero, giant Ultraman stuff, way more popular right now. We're going to have Jet Jaguar show up in this in the style of like when you push a wrestler by putting them in a big show with like the main face or something on those lines. They were like, we're going to have Godzilla is going to gas up Jet Jaguar by fighting him in this, then teaming up with him to fight something else. And then at the end, Jet Jaguar becomes normal human size and he walks off into the sunset, set to the delightful Jet Jaguar theme song, which they created for the thing. Jet Jaguar was never seen again. They never did anything further with him, and he's kind of become infamous as like a miserable jobber in the leagues of kaiju cinema deriving from Toho's like Godzilla stuff specifically.
So were you able to be exposed to a lot of this stuff because you grew up over in Europe and or across the world? Because I feel like a lot of this isn't licensed in America, and that's kind of why I'm asking a little curiously about it.
So my first exposure to this was actually Power Rangers, which I think is
like American,
that's very common to pretty much like everyone in English-speaking territories.
Right.
But for me, it was so growing up in India at the time, I had a very weird childhood as far as like media I consumed was concerned, because as far as like English playing media that you can get for your kids in India in 1996, 1997 in New Delhi, there was a lot of it available. And there was a video store at the U.S. Embassy and stuff like that my parents used. But what was interesting about it was that it had like a time delay on it. So I actually grew up in the 90s without the 90s kids elements. I do not remember the 90s. I remember the 80s. I saw He-Man growing up. I saw G.I. Joe and Thundercats.
Whoa,
and so
you're
forth.
an 80s transplant 90s kid.
And when I got back to Transformers, and when I got back to the UK, and I was trying to interface with other kids, I was like, "Anyone love He-Man? You guys like He-Man? He's got a sword." No one was interested in that.
They're like, "Are you making that up? That doesn't sound real."
One of the only things that was like current was a couple of VHS tapes of Power Rangers, and I think that might have actually been one of the sort of formative elements for me that planted the seed of fascination with monsters in me, because I remember very vividly seeing Rita Repulsa, Witch Bandora in the original, but Rita Repulsa in Saban's like dubbed creation, cackling maniacally with glee as someone like as Finster, her servant, creates multiple monsters out of clay, like designing them himself and then bringing them to life where they descend to the planet. And I have feel such a deep kinship with Rita Repulsa as being someone who is delighted by the creation of and then the realization of a monster. And the designs in tokusatsu are really fascinating because unlike a lot of Western stuff, they didn't abandon practical costumes, but the practical costumes they acquired their own weird visual language where they are not interested in realism. They are not interested in necessarily being like overtly like unsettling to the eye, although they often are. It's more sort of spectacular pantomime, or like a descendant of something in the vein of like a kabuki theater, where this is not meant to be a literal representation of something, but is rather like a series of encoded symbols. Like you may have a monster that represents that is born out of something as mundane as a toaster, and then so that thing will some people might approach that and say, well, I'm going to take a toaster and I'm going to turn its face into like a mouth and I'm going to have it breathe fire or something along those lines. But a lot of toku designers like Tamatsu Shinohara, because they're always working to a humanoid costume, because the humanoid costume has to be
Mm.
spectacular. It has to really like hit the eyes, and they have nothing in the way of CG or
And
so forth.
it
They
would have to be
designed
somewhat
something.
functional too, right? Like
Yeah, exactly. It
that's
has
a
to be able to
limitation.
exist in a physical space. And
Yes.
so people like Tomoto Shinohara, who designed a lot of what we now know as like the Power Rangers monsters, for instance, they go along the lines of something along the lines of like, okay, here's a toaster monster. I'm going to have a steel gray human sort of Zentai suit, and then I'm going to have like a array of glowing red bars down one side, and then down the other side there's like a host of like pieces of toast, like a sort of like leaping out of the skin through slots that are each emblazoned with grinning faces, and then maybe the character itself has a sort of like has like a smooth, sleek, shiny face where the human face should be, but the chest piece has been fashioned to look like a grinning grill and has maybe the breakfast accoutrements are spilling from its maw or something like that. It's very it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous, but it gives rise to, like I said earlier, this is where I think one of the purest places where you see that intersection in monster design between fashion and fashion, between character, between function, form, style. They're one of the purest examples of style as substance to me. I'm going to be very honest. Aside from like when I was growing up and watching Power Rangers, and then also a few select things that I've watched over the years because I wanted to, like Kamen Rider Drive, a lot of the weirder Kamen Rider one-off films by Keiichi Amemiya, like Z-O, Shin Kamen Rider, which wasn't by Amemiya, but was one of those, like part of that weird stretch there where they did Z-O, J, all of these. I have not actually watched a huge amount of Toku like one-to-one. I have not sat down and watched all of Ultraman. I have not sat down and watched all of like the Sentai series. I have seen clips and so forth of specific ones. I am more I'm a fake fan, and what I like is the costumes. So I have consumed
you're a fan of a specific element.
I'm
Which is
sorry.
fine. Which is fine. I wouldn't call
books.
you a fake fan.
Sorry,
yeah.
I would-
You want
No,
you just
at
want
this
the
point,
goodies. You don't need the trimming. You don't need the fat. You just want the trim.
Yeah, no, I know what I know
You've
what I
given
like.
us
What I
a
like is the
doctorate
monster
thesis
costumes.
on this, my guy.
Yeah, I would. To hear you describe yourself as a fake fan is absolutely the opposite of my understanding of your
Yeah,
relationship
no,
with this
you're
stuff. Which
you're
is
a
that
pig in shit right now.
Yeah, I've learned quite a bit. Especially as someone who knew, virtually nothing. And not to say I don't dislike Kamen Rider. I think the costume designs are really cool. It's just that I don't, like, as you said, like, I don't watch a bunch of it because it's A, not available over here, and B, it's kids action and entertainment.
Yeah, no,
I can just
the
look at the
vast majority of
costume and
Kamen
go,
Rider and
"This looks
certainly
cool."
Sentai and Ultraman is aimed at children. It's aimed at
Right.
kids. It may, in the way a lot of like good kids media does, it may have these grand melodramatic spectacle moments that can translate to or like appeal to an adult audience. But if you're watching it and trying to like, it's very intentionally designed for children, and that's totally fine.
Yeah.
It's not
And
it's not the bizarre like broad marketing slurry of
Right.
the MCU where they're trying. I mean, obviously they're still nakedly trying to sell toys and so forth. That is
Right,
the
it
driving
is-
force
it's the
of
same
Kamen
industry.
Rider. But I really loathe media that is that it tries to market itself. The thing I hate the most about a lot of media these days is from produced especially like in the West by like groups like the Disney monolith or whatever, is that it tries to age itself with its viewers and market itself
Right.
as like, you do not need to expand beyond the confines of what's here. If you've been
Right.
told that there is great literature out there or great cinema out there, let me tell you, what you're consuming right now is that. Let me like flatter you with like endless series of prestige trailers and so forth that describe what you're watching as like a masterpiece. We're going to get into these bizarre cultural skirmishes with individuals like Scorsese to try and enlist you into this war where you become like, you need to know that what you are consuming is high culture. It's the greatest stuff. It's exactly parallel with Gilgamesh. It's the myth. It's the mythology. I can't stand stuff like that. I really can't. I would much rather something was completely honest about itself as something like lowbrow or whatever, because I think that that doesn't inherently devalue it. If it's okay, I'd like to jump off there and just say there's one particular, like, I really hate the use of the term art as an elevator in and of itself. I hate it when someone says this is art, or like
Sure.
this can't be described as art or whatever. I think, and this is my insanely broad definition of art that may shock and amaze you. I think anything that is created by a human that is not purely functional is art of a sort. And I think it's almost impossible to create something that is purely functional. I think literally anything and everything can can and is art. But of course, that doesn't preclude the vast majority of it from being completely aimless or like bad or like
Right.
purposeless art. But it's still art. It doesn't become you can't disqualify things. And the moment that people start to do that, it's almost inevitably tied to some value judgment that they have made about the subject matter or the creator or the purpose of the art. That kind of I was kind of just decided to cut straight to the center of what I was talking about.
It's a good point. Like there's plenty of things I don't like that I would still absolutely like. I wouldn't say they weren't art. That would be absurd.
No.
I think it's the tendency to sort of. I wouldn't necessarily. I think the first one we would probably latch onto now would be like moralizing it. But I do think one way to kind of take the air out of the idea of moralizing it would be thinking of something in terms of function and the value of aesthetic function, where it doesn't necessarily have a didactic or a sort of political aim on its own face. Obviously, politics informs everything, but I feel like those are sort of. They then go downstream, and then that's where you get the moralism as it's sort of prescribed to it. And that's, I think thinking of things broadly in that way actually could sometimes kind of take the air out of it, and it's a more valuable way to sort of quantify it. So I really like that description of art.
Here's something that's interesting that I've noticed. So, like talking about something purely functional, something that has, like, I just tried to define art as something that is not purely functional, and I added to that I don't think it's possible to create something that is purely functional. If you consider something as basic and directly, purposefully didactic as a warning label for a piece of machinery, something along those lines, like a small piece of yellow text that is designed to catch the eye on a large, complex piece of moving, say, military equipment or something that has many interlocking parts is extremely expensive and demands that you treat it with respect because both it and its owner are terrified of being damaged. It may say something like, warning, like this side up only, or thruster opens here, or like insert fuel rod or whatever. In art in the last few years, well, actually for much longer than that, like since the 70s or even earlier, there has been in a lot of like science fiction and fantasy, but it's especially crystallized now. There's a particular kind of functional rococo that I've noticed. Yoji Shinkawa and like Kojima's work is the work that he does for Kojima and Kojima games, like a Death Stranding, for instance, they're really like some of the prime examples of this, or Neon Genesis Evangelion, where they use things like warning labels and small functional ports and like details on the surface of working machinery has become, they add those things to almost any form that they can like acquire. Death Stranding is littered with examples of this. You have these great monolithic shapes or more complex ones that are just covered in small individual warning labels and instructions. They're not there because they intricately thought about the operation of the machine. They may have, but they're not there because they want you to understand that they think it's a real machine and they have done all these things. They're there because they have become an affectation in and of themselves. They've become a decoration. They're rococo gilding. They're like an additional layer of gold lily in like a ceiling rose or part of an opera balustrade.
That's a really well articulated way, because like I'm thinking of like the umbrella device, that what's her name has in that game.
Yes,
it is just so obscenely like technical and weird looking for what is literally an umbrella. It has, as you said, has many of those types of little words on that, as if it was saying some sort of important, like instructional language.
It's the implication like, of complexity, the implication of function.
The printing of a brand on it, like a company
not even
logo.
Like for the sake of world building or something, just for the sake of itself, because someone like Shinkawa or Hideaki Anno or Hideo Kojima, a lot of these creators are obsessed with it. In Evangelion, like the screens filled with like completely functional information, like within universe, like all of these charts and bars that go up and down and constantly, and all of the warning labels and stuff that dot the surface of the EVs. They're there because they are part of the decoration. They're the same as like fire carvings on the surface of a fire monster in a tokusatsu thing. Or
the show does not linger on those things.
And that is something that is purely functional.
Well, it does, sort of.
has become something that is is purely ornamental. And I think if it's a very like crude example because it's the most obvious. It's like a very obvious one to draw, whatever. But you can't make something purely functional because even if you make something that is aggressively purely functional, someone else recontextualizes it or interprets it as something ornamental, or
Right.
becomes obsessed with it. I remember, I think it was definition that I think Jeff Gerstmann on the Bombcast did like a million years ago, where he described art as something you can be into. Like if you can be into it, it's probably art. And I think you can be. Don't quote me on that because I don't know if that's exactly what he said, but
It works
or
as
if
a
that's even
paraphrase, kind
if
of.
that's even for him. I like the idea of if you can be into it, it's something. And there are, as we've discovered via the internet, people can be into just about anything in just about any way.
Oh
So
yes, yeah.
It certainly
It's
opens the
wild.
floodgates. Yeah.
Thinking of those sort of aesthetic ties. Having worked in a factory, I don't want to say like there's a one-to-one to what you're saying, but that sort of materialist reality aesthetic. I don't think it was uncommon for people I would talk to when working in the factories that like at least one of them would be into anime of some sort. I immediately think of those chemical labels, the red, the blue, and the yellow one with a number on each that would denote the level of lethality or risk associated with it. Forget the name of it. It's a specific one you look at, as well as when you go through lockout, tagout stuff. I could show you it later, but like old lockout, tagout books and guides, the terrible tiger they would show associated with it is like, it's hilarious to just think of what artist was commissioned to do this, and you're like,
yep.
so I'm doing this for what, like electrical boxes and shit? Just awesome. But yeah, in terms of kind of sort of where we'd met and spoke to on things, like where you would come from via Tumblr and like a lot of sort of new movements. I think of the new movements now, the aesthetic ones. I think of like the crazier ones where it's like tied to a political project. I think on the left, I see war is aesthetic and like compilations set to music and faux VHS and sort of technical filters passed over it. And then on the right, you have like people who are like into traditional Catholicism that basically just want to do pogroms to people.
Oh yeah.
And like it's weird. It's weird quantifying it because the flattening effect of art and aesthetics is like like some of the adherents are like they're like transgender people. That's like, dude, these people want to smash your head with a cinder block, dog. But like art and aesthetic sort of like flow over you, where it's just like some people in comics talk about this, where they were just talking about it doesn't. If you heard it now, you would just think, well, this person's just like alt-right or so-and-so, but like aesthetically, swastikas and shit were like generally punk stuff and almost had a apolitical connotation
for a
to
long time.
A great deal of like punk people.
Lemmy from Motorhead collected Nazi memorabilia and was
Lemmy
definitely
from
not
Motorhead,
a Nazi.
He's not a Nazi, but fucking an incredibly eccentric guy.
Right.
But he's
exactly.
like you would think of him in today's parlance as basically a war weeb.
Yeah, absolutely a war weeb.
He was so aesthetically like drawn to those images.
And he came from a generation where, I think his dad probably fought in that war, some shit like that.
Yeah, this isn't me like doing apologia. Or,
no,
like,
not at all.
Hey,
but it would be insane
the
to
makers
forget
of
that
shit.
context, I think.
Yeah, there are many means by which a
think
person could become into something, and there are many reasons by which a person could become into something, and the consumption of art does not exist in a political void either. But it doesn't exist in a contextual void. Additionally, like you have to it's something on those lines. I mean, it's like it's something a lot of people have harped on, but like even earlier than the punk stuff or whatever, like much earlier, the swastika was like a cultural symbol that existed prior to the Nazis and was recontextualized by them. And so,
but then
there are
But
some
then
people
now-
today who
but then
attempt to use
now-
it in that way. When we came back from India, my parents brought with them a small painting of Ganesha, which was a gift from some friends of ours there when we left, and it was placed on the wall of our house. And this Ganesh was done in the traditional style and had a small swastika in the Vedic orientation, in the Hindu orientation, not like when it's turned on its side like that. In the Nazi style, that's partly what denotes like a Nazi swastika specifically. But growing up, I had a lot of very confused and upset friends who would come into the house, see this painting of Ganesh with like one hand up, the palm spread, and a swastika in the middle of it, proudly displayed in the living room. And I had more than a couple of friends ask me nervously exactly like what my parents' deal was, especially since like as diplomats, their occupation was kind of vague and was not obvious to kids. So I often had like some friends who were like, what's with the swastika? And I would have to be like, oh no, it's fine. It was a gift from
I'm
friends
sure
in
you
India.
had like a script of sorts ready to go.
Yeah, some
I
people have
did my
coffee
best.
table books. You had religious
You're like,
iconography.
oh yeah, and here's our living room. Here's these lamps. Here's the
Yep.
swastika. Here's some more coffee table books. Here's some other stuff.
My parents have
Yeah,
a very interesting set of knickknacks and odd items that they have gathered over the years. They spent like a lot of time in Moscow. They spent time on like both sides of the Berlin Wall right before and after that happened. They've been around, and one of my favorite objects in the house is a small plaster swan wing, which sat on our mantelpiece for years, and I was never told where it came from. And then, even though I asked a couple of times, my mother was always evasive about it. And then years later, after I had finished a series of exams, my mother decided to take me with her to a student reunion in Bruges. And when we got to Bruges, because she at one point did a degree abroad in Bruges, when we got to Bruges and we went to the hotel, as we were entering this hotel, she was like, "This hotel used to be the student lodging where I lived or whatever." And I looked around and I noticed that the balustrade, like going all the way down the side of the stairs, it was covered in little plaster swans, and I noticed about halfway up in this hotel in Bruges, one of those swans was missing a plaster wing, and I asked Mum directly, "Did you take that plaster wing?" And she said, "Oh yeah, no, a bunch of students did. Whenever we left, we would just snap one off. Most of the people here have one too." And that was very entertaining to me, because now I look at that thing and I go, "Oh well, I mean."
There's
Some
some
part of me kind of
handyman.
wants to go
somewhere.
back there someday. Maybe just, I don't know. I'm not sure if returning it now is a good idea. But
Get in there with
the
a glue
See
gun.
it again.
I think part of the counterculture adoption of Nazi stuff in the 60s was an expression of what I think of as the bohemian class was very fucking spoiled. And if you read, and I mean it's understandably that they were the economy was fantastic. Everything was really cheap. If you were if you were like middle class or above in the United States of America and you were 20 years old in the 60s,
Sure.
the world was your oyster. And you can get a sense of this from reading any memoir that was written at the time or shortly afterwards by people who lived through it. So memoirs like, anything by Hunter S. Thompson, the one called Borehole by John Mellon, who was one of the three people who experimented with trepanation as a way to get permanently high in the 60s. And by that, I mean literally drilling holes in their heads.
Yeah. Oh God.
Wait. His name was John Borehole?
No, John Mellon. The book is called Borehole.
Oh, okay. Sorry, my auditory processing was great there, but for a moment I lived in a wonderful world where the trepanation guy was called John Borehole.
Yeah, I wish. No,
Anyway, sorry.
It's just
Yeah,
a
we all
coincidence.
there were three of them in this like weird little cult that decided that they were tired of buying LSD, and that they thought at the time that LSD caused oxygenation in the blood around the brain, and that was what had the psychedelic effect. This is completely wrong, but at the time we hadn't really figured out how psychedelics work. It was all very underground shit. So they figured if they just drilled an air hole in their actual skull, they would be high all the time permanently.
Oh man, trepanation.
This did not turn out to be the case, but the one of them was a woman. Her name is Natalie Fielding, something like that. She actually ran for council member of somewhere on a platform of trepanation for the national health. And her son, she was actually a peer. I can't remember what level of peer, but her son is a lord, and he's currently in the House of Lords, and he's like a hyper conservative Tory. Um, and I think she's
So he's a member of the House of Lords. Boom.
yes, she's still around and alive. But she created an art film called Heartbeat in the Brain, where she used a dental drill to make her trepanation hole. Like she actually filmed the whole thing and made a film out of it. So people at that point could do that kind of thing. If you had $20, you could survive for 6 months in India or wherever you wanted to go, just being a fucking hippie. There was no AIDS. The drugs were really good. It was very unusual for you to get a bad batch of literally anything. We had no research chemicals polluting the market. Everything was dirt cheap. There were no travel restrictions. It was extremely easy to falsify any sort of documentation that you wanted, and birth control had just come out. So you could fuck constantly and never get anything worse than like syphilis or gonorrhea, which were at the time, completely treatable. There weren't any new strains that were untreatable, and we had all of the medical technology that required it. So as a result, I mean, you think about people who grew up in this world, going on just unbelievable adventures. But if you read their philosophy and the kind of shit that they were doing, it was completely divorced from the reality that we live in now. It was so bad and so weird and so different from anything that millennials or Zoomers will ever experience that my own mother has apologized to me. She's like, I'm so sorry that the fucking protesting that we did in the 60s and all of this work that we thought we were doing on the social structure turned out to be useless. I mean, everything is so much worse now than it was. So I think that the only thing that we have to compare it to is like ironic racism on the internet at the turn of the last century. And if you were there, like if you're old enough that you were actually there, you know that it really and truly was ironic for many years. And so the people who were, doing Nazi stuff and saying racial slurs and stuff like that, it was genuinely a joke. And that joke came from a place of extreme privilege and total blindness to how that kind of shit was real. It was like a child picking up a gun and playing with it. So
And many of those people grew out of it,
exactly. The good ones did,
Exactly, yeah.
But it did not turn into genuine racism until a few years later, because people started noticing, oh, hey, well, I can take control of the narrative here and keep pushing it and pushing it. Well, that kind of culture of that sort of just stupid, naive innocence and joking around, that's why, Lemmy has a swastika on some of his stuff, or why the Iron Cross became a fashion symbol. And if you ask somebody like that at the time, like, hey man, the Nazis were pretty bad news, are you sure you want to wear this? They'd be like, fuck the Nazis, we're stripping power from this symbol by using it in this way. And God, it makes me so mad reading all these memoirs and watching documentaries and stuff about it, because they were so fucking spoiled. So spoiled.
Oh man, the one anecdote I have that I can relate to this is my cousin worked for the recently deceased Guru Ram Dass, who was a white dude who worked with Timothy Leary and was one of the guys who was one of the first people to be taking acid. And in the little time I got to spend, I went to his wedding that was in Hawaii there on Ram Dass's property. Everyone I met there was very old, older, and it had come from that generation, was largely white, clearly wealthy, and utterly unconcerned with the state of the world, and seemingly in a place where they thought things were okay. And it was fascinating. It was fascinating to like see all these people and just kind of feel like I was both younger and very much smarter than them. It was very much like I could get the sense of what you're describing, where it's like, oh, these people have never had it tough.
I
They
I
literally
mean-
like they're just it's like I don't know. I've literally sat with a bunch of white people and done a 2-hour kirtan, and it felt weird.
I mean, I think it also just depends on, you know, who was having the conversation at the time, because one sort of general thing is that like a lot of like the beats and shit did also come from inherited wealth.
Yep.
Which doesn't get discussed a lot. So in terms of class, like your ability to fuck off and drill a hole into your head and I don't know, get fucked up in Mexico, put a bottle on top of your wife's head and William Tell her face off. Oftentimes, if you came from a certain financial background, you were more likely to get sorted into that grouping versus others. I don't know. I wouldn't moralize it necessarily. It does seem to be in terms of the sort of
I think if you lack
the
an awareness
phrase I
about
always
it,
think of.
if you lack an
Yeah,
awareness
yeah.
about what has happened to you,
Yep.
and you come to perceive yourself as having like solely risen to this position off the sweat of your own brow and your own accomplishments, or that you are somehow insulated by some other exceptional quality that you are like, I mean, that's where you
Like
get a lot of
Lemmy.
these individuals who or think of themselves as messianic or having like acquired unique enlightenment. If you don't pay attention to where the support structures are around you, you believe them to be invisible, you believe yourself truly to be elevated and floating in the air unsupported, that's when it begins to curdle into poison and you turn into like a one of the worst kinds of people, I think. And I mean, like I was saying earlier, like I've only been able to pursue a lot of my own career because I've been very lucky to never have to deal with things like I said, like housing security, or be obligated to like I have to be conscious of that, like that support was part of what allowed me to. I'm not going to like completely eliminate my own effort from the equation, but like it's a huge part of it. And if I ignore it, then I end up like a Lemmy or whatever. And that's.
Well, I don't think Lemmy's inherently bad. I think it was like Eliza was saying. It was
Well,
more,
I was just using it because he was the one we were talking about right now.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I think you would end
But-
up just
but-
like someone who was, you know, like, I mean,
Like
like
he's-
Elon Musk, for Christ's sakes, like someone who
Christ.
thinks
Well,
they're
I
a
think the thing with
genius.
Musk is he knows, but he's lying about it. I think it's.
I mean, I think a lot of the people in the position you're describing, on some level, would know and are lying about it.
Yeah. If only to themselves.
I think
Yeah, absolutely to themselves.
sort of aesthetic attachment is one of those weird things where it is kind of. I only think of demoralizing now insofar as social media goes, because part of that is sort of having bits of the human connections that form things naturally. I mean, you could get into a deeply philosophical argument where actually algorithms are a natural outcome because human hands produced it. But now algorithmic creation is soon going to apply to digital programming, which means digital things will be creating things like in a self-propelling way. Which,
There will be stuff that has been made without the touch of human hands, is what you're saying.
well, yes, and processes to make things that will not have human editorial,
Right.
or at least to the extent where individual mechanisms are clearly outlined because of the needs of process will necessitate process being handled at such a level that the computational work being put into it will be something that a massive group of people would have to undertake versus the motivation for doing machine learning, which is to be able to do something that would take hundreds, maybe thousands of people to do it. Bitcoin, for an awful example. So I don't like that applying to aesthetic process as it relates to engagement, because that left and right paradigm I had mentioned. You have your trad cats on one side, you have your war weebs and your sad war weebs and your doomer weebs of many stripes. My heart goes out to quite a few of those people, because like it feels as though the engagement algorithms sort of put you into that sorting hat once again. They sort of dole you out. Here's the box you go into, and like that's if I ever think of moralism as it relates to that, it's because like I feel like so much of class as it relates to work sort of, even when I'm trying to be more charitable in terms of outcomes for people, like a lot of people don't get a hand in the sort of person they get to be. Like they don't get to like choose, not because they are never culpable, but like that molding process, those neuron grooves that say, I'm going to scream a bunch of slurs and act like a fucking misanthropic piece of shit, because that was the constant reified shit that went into the molding of me. And like it's I'm a man. I see a lot of young people, especially their sense of hopelessness, as it sort of relates to that, and the aesthetic things that kind of land on their laps, and they sort of have that same moment. But then so much of it involves sort of induced depression, not just from being alienated in their own lives, but then like the works produced from it, and it's just this constant reification process with like
feedback loop,
like this.
Yes.
Just someone is putting a boot on your head, and it's an M60 loaded with anhedonia, and they're blasting your face off.
A thing I've been concerned with, as someone who literally does struggle with and is medicated for depression, is the online discussion of depression exacerbating it. In ways that are almost uncontrollable, right? In ways that are just that do create a feedback loop. It's something I started to notice, maybe like 6 or 7 years ago, and it's one of the reasons I steer clear of a lot of social media convos these days. It's just not productive or helpful in any way.
It's wallowing, and it becomes a personality. There is this thing with the online stuff where you get into your echo chamber and you're like, well, it's ableist to expect me to do anything, so I'm not going to do anything, and I will validate my not doing anything by calling everyone who says that I should go outside ableist. It's really fucking bad. It's incel level self-sabotage.
It's a logic trap. It's like it's a self-made prison.
It is. It is exactly the same shit as the incels just going around and around on their forums going, well,
right,
I'm ugly because I'm 5'8" instead of 6 foot, and my chin is slightly recessed, and the lottery
was already rolled, and I lost.
Yes, everything is beyond my control is the sentiment.
This is women's fault for some reason, except it's the incel stuff is, instead of women, this is neurotypical stuff or whatever,
or just society,
and the whole this episode's going to come out months after this has already passed, but the stupid Hermione discourse that's been going on for days now.
Who?
I'm blessed to not know. Yeah.
Somebody got mad and it turned into a big ableism discourse that Hermione Granger was called a know-it-all and annoying. And this was ableist because everybody has decided that Hermione is autistic, and calling autistic people annoying is ableist. As an annoying autistic person, let me just say, nothing annoys me more than other fucking autistic people. And it is one of the things that has helped me develop as a person, is noticing that when I hang out with other friends of mine who I really get along with in terms of like brain mirroring, a lot of the shit they do annoys the crap out of me. You know, like the fidgeting and the inability to control the tone of your voice, or like not the tone, but the volume of the voice, and you know, not being able to take a social hint and stuff like that. And then I go home and I think to myself, man, I got to work on my shit. And it's not me hating myself. It's not a value judgment. I'm not saying, oh, I'm a worse person because I'm autistic and I'm annoying. There's nothing like wrong with being annoying. It's just something that affects the way that you move through the world, and you can work on it or you don't, you know. But this stuff really fucking worries me. I look at young people who are like trapped in this little Tumblr box of I can't do anything because I'm disabled, and expecting me to do anything or hoping for me to do anything is ableism. It really worries me. It really does.
And that's the thing. What the problem is, not to fully tack on this, because I try to think of it as it relates to aesthetic, but I guess it would be important to acknowledge that, because there are visual cues and indicators. I won't go full anthropology, but you know, you got your P Crew, you got your Steven Universe or various other prestige animated program for children that is watched by 19 to 44-year-old people, which whatever. And the thing is, like, there are tendencies that sort of go full circle, where you actually end up saying deeply ableist or like bigoted things, sort of on the road to then justifying like X amount of reasons for being unable to do this or that, by having X amount of markers through anecdotal evidence, or solely working off of lived experience, where you cannot map that to thousands or millions of people. Try coming up with a general consensus of the trans community, the black community,
Try coming up with a general
Asian
consensus
folks.
on anything.
Right.
Try coming up with a general consensus on anything. Like, I follow left politics, and the worst thing you can do if you're into left politics is listen to the people that talk about left politics, or the people that talk about theory in left politics. It's like, if any of you ever seen Lars von Trier's Antichrist?
No.
Oh, it's a very
long time ago.
I've seen the part where
Jake,
the fox
you remember
says
that
chaos
scene?
reigns.
Yeah, no other parts from Lars von Trier's Antichrist. Involving hammers and nails.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm aware of that stuff.
Anyway, but Christ on a cracker.
It's a lot of torture.
You know, there's this. It's the part also that's kind of why I go to art, is that, you know, any world would be better than this one we're in. But you know, that in itself could be a trap. We're fucking stuck with this shithole, and it's actually not that bad. And life is the best game in town. We all would like to believe we know what comes after this, and some people, you know, have a firm idea that they know.
Right.
Or that there is nothing, or that there is definitely fucking something, and you fucked up if you're not trying to get towards that. What dismays me so much is like where there's like a certain amount of culpability, but then some of it is also just like you look at a bunch of these people for 5 minutes, and you're like, how many of these decisions have they coherently made of their own volition, where they weren't sold a fucking line? Because we all get sold a line. It informs who we are. It's just how much of it has been sold to you.
I mean, one thing I'm always conscious of is that a lot of these people are, roughly 10 years behind the average age of all of us as a co-host cohort. And that, to me, marks almost a generational divide in people that can remember before the internet. Like, and even as a child, I don't know.
A lot of the people I'm thinking of are actually our age.
Okay, that's fair. That's actually pretty fair.
Because that thing recently where the self-determined autistic therapist got mad at August for making a joke about ADHD people being like the Terminator.
I did see that. Hell yes, that was really funny. I saw that. Yeah, that was really funny.
That dude was 36 fucking years old.
Okay, yeah, no, you make a great point there.
Yeah.
It's like when I see young people, but there's certainly people our age in this group for sure.
And I mean, sure, everyone can mistreat or malign or like sort of use language as a cover. I'm going to think that's more likely the older a person is. I'm going to think like, like, who are you trying to get one over on? Who are you trying to fucking trick here? Like, cause I'm sorry, there's a skepticism I just get at that point, because in your 30s, the die has sort of been cast. It's very difficult to make significant changes to oneself after a certain amount of time put in on this world. And I don't know. But yeah.
I mean, unless you're me and you can learn to eat raw cheese.
That's right.
Well, you're a baby on this podcast anyway.
It's true. Gosh. I want to say, let's see here. We want to start wrapping things up, folks.
I mean, so yeah, I'll cut in if we got. I mean, this is editable. We're about at 2 hours right now. Okay. Francine, if there's anything you want to still talk about, we can certainly. I'll check in with everyone, but we could keep going if everyone's cool with it.
Nothing that I can think of specifically. Right. I guess like. Yeah, no. I think, interestingly enough, despite being terrified of the prospect of trying to summarize, like when I was thinking about going on this podcast to begin with, I was probably incorrectly like thinking about basically trying to make an effort to summarize my entire self. But I don't think that's of all, it's not necessary. It's not what this is.
You just need to bring an essence of yourself.
But I'm actually pretty pleased with having like brought like two or three several like major points that have been rolling around my head for a long time that I've wanted to express on a platform like this, and I got my shot at doing those. So I'm very happy about that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no worries. Well, I guess.
This is a part where we can do for guests specifically where it's just the end of the podcast. Do you want to plug yourself a little bit, Francine?
My name is Francine, but on most platforms I'm identified as Witnesstheabsurd, which is my sort of nom de plume, I guess, my artist's moniker. You can find me at my ArtStation, ArtStation/Witnesstheabsurd, at my Twitter, which is at personfaces, which is where I am most readily contacted, or you can email me directly at witnesstheabsurd@gmail.com. I'm always happy to talk business. Hold on a second, I've got to cough. I'm always happy to talk.
Cough?
Yep, no, there's a perfect mute. I've got that cough button. I'm always happy to talk business with people, or just to talk about anything. I also have a Patreon at Patreon.com/WitnessTheAbsurd, where you can see time-lapse recordings of my work, bits of my work before it's posted elsewhere, and also get the chance to vote and tell me what to paint next, if that's what you're into. I'm very excited for the next year or so. Some things are moving in certain places, and I'll be very excited to talk about some future projects when I can. But for the moment, I'm afraid there's nothing else I can directly plug aside from myself. So there you go.
Excellent.
I would like to recount my favorite interaction with Francine on the internet.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
We've been mutuals for a long time. I think like Francine said, this is the first like direct discussion we've had with each other on a voice chat. But yeah. We've been mutuals on Twitter and Tumblr forever. Mm-hmm. But many years ago, I think it was like 2015, something like that, the Environmental Protection Agency on Earth Day came up with this absolutely harebrained scheme to invent a mascot to encourage recycling.
Oh, I think I remember this now. Go on.
And
Holy
he was
shit.
absolutely just phenomenally badly designed, looked like he was from like 1995, mascot of a recycling receptacle, and his name was Dunk.
Oh my god.
And a lot of people kind of pass this around. We're like, ha, that's pretty funny. For some reason, Francine and I thought this was absolutely the wildest and best shit we had ever seen.
I
for
just
like 48
Google image
hours.
searched Dunk.
Dunk is exceptional.
Oh my god.
We went apeshit on this thing for probably a day and a half. And, I made a bunch of Dunk memes, like, God, I can't even remember the nomenclature, but I ripped off the Ron Paul Funeral City thing. It's like Dunk Funeral City,
500,000 billion dead.
I
be track, be cold, be sweet, crude, be part of my father's funeral city. On that note, I wish I knew who wrote Ron Paul Funeral City, because I genuinely think it's one of my favorite pieces of poetry that's ever been written.
It's so good. I know I have like a friend of a friend, so I sort of knew a little bit about who came up with that, and they're actually in the fashion industry. Speaking of connections between monstrousness and fashion, but yeah, they were like a serious fashion person.
I figured as much. It certainly always had that. My friend Tommy, who I talk with a great deal about this, we both have a great deal of affection for a very specific kind of like sort of strange, like postmodern magic realist surreality sort of flavor that something like a Ron Paul Funeral City brings, where it's using pieces. I mean, SCP Foundation, it's a big mixed bag. There's a lot of good and garbage stuff in there, but they hit some of those notes sometimes. There's something about the idea of the spectacle of grand industrial like devastation on like an eschatological scale or whatever that is also codified in a religious way. There's something about that that's very compelling, and I saw some of that in Dunk. I saw that beauty in Dunk.
We both really saw
the incarnation of a living receptacle for what must be destroyed when he fills his own body with it. It's truly exceptional, and I think that by abandoning Dunk, the apparently it wasn't the EPA, it was the NSA.
Oh my god, yes, I forgot that part. That
which I think was a key element of this, was that it was the fucking NSA who created this guy, who brought him forth raw and skinless, mewling into the world, like tumbling out of whatever orifice the NSA has among many, just to sort of like flail in front of us. One of God's like one of God's little jokes, and Dunk has a special place in my heart. I remember our brief fixation on Dunk, and looking at him again brought it all back, because God, there's a kind of rictus to the corner of his grin, where like it's akin to Nicholson's Joker is probably the closest way to describe it, but like there's the way that the mouth is pinched at the corners, but in a manner that's completely unnatural or detached from any kind of actual musculature involved in smiling. It's as though it's been like held open. It's he's
unheimlich. He's not
unheimlich is it's the perfect description.
And the fact that he comes from the NSA elevates it so much, because what is this? Is it a fucking psyop? Why is the NSA interacting with Earth Day at all?
How did the NSA
in terms of their budgets,
right?
They were like, we need like a few million to just sort of black bag a bunch of people. So, okay, let's try to justify this within the budget. Hire an artist to make a fucking Tim and Eric CGI of a dude, and then
of a living recycling bin.
Yeah.
Oh god, his face comes outward.
Yeah.
There's no reason for it. He could just be a flat face, as opposed to like this textured outward. Like, what is it in the shape of?
It's
Fuck.
It's in the manner of like if you consider, for instance, like there's a direct line, I think, between dunk and classical Greek theater, like Hellenic theater in the
Of course.
original style, where of course you had like a select number of masks, similar to like a No or Kabuki style theater, where you have a select number of icons that represent particular emotions or classical archetypes. And I think dunk is probably the closest thing that we have to that in a modern sense. So there's nothing else really compares to dunk or to things like dunk, that particular kind of rictus grin that emerges from the surface of any given inanimate object to denote sentience, to denote an ability to speak, to communicate, to make itself known. And of course the perfect completion of dunk as a conceit, that dunk no longer exists, that dunk was himself dunked and abandoned and destroyed, and thus was himself a spectacular waste of money, energy, everything. He embodies waste in more ways than one, and that made him poetically perfect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I always remember this when we were posting dunk, for those few days, and I was just cranking out dunk memes, and in one of them you replied and you said, "I love it when you get experimental," and I felt so seen because no one else was taking this seriously as like postmodern commentary.
Hell yeah.
Except Francine.
Hell yeah.
Was the only one who saw what I was doing and appreciated it, and it's not that I take it seriously, because I don't.
Everything is art. Everything is art.
Exactly. This absurdism needs to be respected.
Appreciate and approach everything on its own merits. That's how I try and like live my media consumption or whatever it is that I'm involving myself with. Like you don't have to treating everything as art does not necessitate approaching everything with the assumption that it sits like in the highest pantheon possible, and you don't have to interpret things that way. You have to dispose of the pantheon altogether. You have to simply approach something on its own merits. What did this try and do? Like engage with it sincerely and seriously. Try and like and like meet it halfway and like understand it. I have a horrible habit of meeting anything that I like halfway, including things that this is obviously doesn't apply to Eliza's dunk memes, but if something has something in it that I like, I will crawl through like barbed wire to find other things about it that I like and to love it on its own terms, no matter how horrible and malformed it may be otherwise. And as a result, there are many like I think a part of that is like that's part of what a lot of people's love for some of the weirder like tokusatsu stuff, for instance, is because like, this thing is completely bizarre, or it's so weird and idiosyncratic or whatever, but you make the effort to love it anyway because there's something in it that's so compelling that you can't find anywhere. I think if there's any one thing I hadn't said on the podcast that I want to say, it's that when I was younger, I truly like I went along with like people's sort of group distaste for like auteur figures, I guess, like especially in the games industry, like figures like the Suda 51, like Koichi Suda or Hideo Kojima or some or Tetsuya Nomura, whose work I think like really deserves better evaluation. As time goes on, I went along with that because I knew it was the de rigueur thing to be like, there's some good things about their work, but man, these guys need an editor. And certainly while having an editor can be like a delightful thing, like it can improve the quality of work, and you should pay attention to what your editor is saying. I think I would rather consume a million more like hugely lopsided, bizarre passion projects from people, especially when they are given enormous amounts of money by some corporation they have hoodwinked into creating something like a Killer 7 or a Metal Gear or something along those lines. I want that more than anything, rather than something that is by objective standards like this is coherently built and good, and it has the right amount of character development and balance, and it resolves correctly, and it is this. And I'm so much more interested in weird, lopsided, idiosyncratic works by people who are just indulging their own like pursuits, and that's what I would like to create someday myself, is something that is completely and totally warped towards the specific niche that I want. So that's the only other thing I wanted to say. I think
that's a perfect way to
that's the thing.
To end it on. Like that is, you gotta just
thank you
define
so
where
much
you want to
for-
end up as an
I
artist.
mean, thank you also to Eliza
yeah.
for remembering that interaction, because I have such a profound respect for you as I do for everyone else on this podcast, and it means a lot to me to know that my appreciation for Dunk and for the dunking of Dunk was
Hey,
real.
let
I'm
it-
not going to forget a
let it
meeting
never
of
be
minds
said.
like that in a hurry.
Yeah.
I remember instances where people actually know what the fuck I'm talking about because it's so fucking rare.
It's the best, yeah. Let it
Yeah.
never be
Someday.
said Dunk did not bring anyone together.
Someday he'll dunk himself and he'll just sort of turn inside out and disappear. It'll be beautiful.
Incredible. I can see it in my mind's eye.
All right, yeah. To wrap it, I would say that at the end of the day, I think when you get that tangible love, even if you're very fixated on this specific image, that of the monster, the thing is, when you have that disproportionate level of love, more often than not, you're not going to necessarily give everyone what they want, but you will give X amount of people in the world that need it what they need.
Exactly.
And that's where you want to be. It's difficult, and it's not without some of its drawbacks, but at the end of the day, you're one of the few people that can do what you do. And it's a pleasure to have you as a very good friend.
Thank you.
Love you, buddy. That said,
love you too, Michelle. Seriously, like all of you are longtime friends of mine, and I'm so glad that we're here and doing a podcast together.
Hey, thanks.
Yeah,
thanks.
no worries. All right,
Yeah.
and as always, this has been Working on It. I'm Michelle Perez.
Just got one more.
One more thing.
What?
Every time I listen to this podcast, I just want this to be shouted out on the podcast itself. One of my favorite parts of the whole podcast is the fact that the outro music ends right as a vocal begins. So there's like a tiny little right there at the very end of the thing. And I'm imploring everyone who listens to this to listen to the very end and hear that bit, because it's great.
All credit to
love...
J Dilla, and it must be noted here, from which we derive our name, his track Working on It, and the sample therein of people saying Working on It.
Wait. One other thing, I forgot. I did the podcast. I did the art for this podcast.
Yeah, you sure
It's
did.
never been mentioned anywhere, but I did the logo for this podcast.
Francine whipped up our logo real quick on a whim when we were very early in the development of this podcast.
That's right,
and it's been great.
Okay, that truly is everything I have to say now. Thank you so much.
Goodbye, everybody.
You got the pink, you got the orb. As always, I'm Michelle Perez. My buddy Jake, my buddy Ruben, my buddy Francine, my buddy Eliza Gager. This has been Working on It, and let's hear that weird